Obviously, Idaho is not alone in this scenario where the landscape of women's reproductive health care could change. It seems every state has passed abortion laws in the last few years, anticipating a U.S. Supreme Court ruling on Mississippi's Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. 13 states have trigger laws banning abortion in all or most circumstances. 23 states have plans to institute similar bans or have it severely restricted, according to the Center for Reproductive Rights data. Idaho has those two abortion laws on the books, one that Joe mentioned, and the other one makes the doctor punitively liable for the procedure. Well, this wasn't always the case, all of these states having these laws on the books, or at least waiting to. For decades, states were unwilling to take it all the way to the Supreme Court since, well, the Supreme Court set the standard in the first place, legalizing access to abortion in America with the Roe v. Wade ruling in 1973. Then along came Idaho in 1990, when the Gem State became the first to make a genuine effort to challenge Roe v. Wade. House Bill 625 would have outlawed abortion entirely, except in cases of non-statutory rape, if that rape was reported within 7 days, or in cases of incest, if the victim is under 18, in cases of severe fetal deformity, or in the threat to the life or health of the woman. In other words, more than 90% of the 1,500 abortions performed in Idaho in 1990 would have been illegal. The arguments for the bill back then, about the same as today. And the bill moved forward based on the belief a favorable ruling would come from the highest court in the land.
The state, meaning you and I as a legislature, have a compelling interest, not just a legitimate interest, but the highest level of interest that we can have. A compelling interest in protecting potential human life when, not just after viability, but throughout the entire pregnancy.
Then House Majority Leader Gary Montgomery saying the balance of the Supreme Court means abortion is no longer a private matter. The ban passed the House 47-36 and then the Senate 25-17. So it wasn't with overwhelming support that it was sent to the then governor, Cecil Andrus, who was running for a fourth term that year, a run on the second floor never before seen in Idaho. The legislature adjourned for the session, and that very day, Governor Andrus walked out of the Capitol to the Hall of Mirrors, the Joe R. Williams building across the street, to say this.
I did not take the oath of office for governor of the state of Idaho to put my name on bad legislation. Ladies and gentlemen, therefore, I have vetoed House Bill 625 and returned it to the House from whence it came.
Governor Andrus was against abortion, but there were three things he says was wrong with this bill. The exceptions were too narrow. The bill came from too far away, crafted by out-of-state interests. And, oh yeah, it was unconstitutional at the time and would cost the state a fortune in the courts. The governor's press secretary that day was Mark Johnson, the guy organizing that press conference across the street because, well, there really wasn't enough room, a room big enough at the time in the Capitol to hold all the members of the media who were interested in this case. Today, he shared with us his memories of that time and its significance.
All the times that I've had the opportunity in the past 6 years to stand at debate on the floor of this House, there's no issue which personally is more serious to me than this one.
For about a 2-week period in late March of 1990, Idaho really was kind of at the political epicenter of what was going on in the country. I remember distinctly reporters from national and even international news organizations sort of parachuting into Boise to cover this story, the end of the legislative session, the reality that the governor was going to have to deal with this piece of controversial legislation one way or the other. Telephones were ringing off the hook 24 hours a day. This was pre-internet days, so one way to communicate was the fax machine, and I remember the fax machine was just humming constantly with message from all over the country and literally around the world, taking a position one way or the other on this legislation.
There's an old saying that hard cases make bad law. But it is indeed the hard cases that we must examine when we consider House Bill 625 as amended.
It's interesting that everybody seemed to chime in from around the country and around the world because one of the biggest issues that Governor Andrus had was that this wasn't a homegrown bill per se.
Mr. Speaker, do you hear that sound? It's a little sound of a caboose We heard it start out in Washington, searching for an engine.
And that became a big focus of his review of the legislation. Why was Idaho selected to provide, in the view of the anti-abortion forces in the country, a test case that the sole purpose of which was to get the legislation before the Supreme Court?
Mr. Speaker, I think I just explained my position on this and why I think it's important that we not be the guinea pigs of the United States and pass an unconstitutional law. I take that responsibility very seriously.
So it was really very much an effort by national organizations, national forces, to use Idaho as a test case.
So I guess somebody thought, well, Idaho looks like a patsy. Ladies and gentlemen, I submit to you, Idaho is not a patsy.
So back then, Idaho was getting a lot of attention for trying to pass a bill like this. Over the last couple of years, Idaho's passed a couple of bills like this, signed by the governor, that kind of just been, I don't want to say under the radar, but just were kind of like just done and done, and that was it. What's changed, I think, is the question I have for you between 1990 and now?
Well, Republican politics in Idaho have become much more conservative than they even were in 1990. You certainly had very conservative Republicans in the legislature, but you had some what I would call more moderate Republicans as well, including a number who voted against the legislation.
So it chugged on up to Idaho, another very pro-life and pro-family state. Well, Mr. Speaker, the caboose is here today. They're not only asking for an engine to pull the train, they're asking for us to pay for the gas. And I guess I resent that.
The other change is that, I think Governor Little has been swept along by the currents of his own party here a little bit, in the sense that he, as you know, Brian, when he signed the legislation or allowed it to become law, expressed real reservations about it, thought that it's probably unconstitutional, wondered about the effect on the victims of rape and incest under the law.
Those are the same reservations that Governor Andrus had 32 years ago.
What are we to do when a woman becomes impregnated as a result of a rape? This bill says that if for some reason she does not report that rape to law enforcement authorities within 7 days of the offense being committed, she violates the law if she terminates that pregnancy. This law would force the woman to compound the tragedy of rape.
And he thought it was truly bad legislation, not only as it affected individual Idahoans, but also because it cast a black eye on the state. It made the state a target for, further efforts of this kind, which is frankly what Idaho has become, again, I'm afraid. I think you would be hard-pressed to find a legislator in the 80s or 90s who would admit that they sort of wholeheartedly accepted a piece of legislation that was entirely drafted by a third party without much input, frankly, from the legislative process. That's a new phenomenon where you have these interest groups creating out of their own agenda a piece of legislation that the legislature then rubber stamps and the governor signs.
When I consider what is right for Idaho, I must consider my own views and the needs of the state of Idaho. This bill satisfies neither. It is not good legislation. I cannot in good conscience affix my signature to its passage.
Is there a lesson that we can kind of look back on that, or is this just very different times and they don't really relate to each other between then and now?
Oh, I think they are very different times for the reasons that we've alluded to already. But I do think that there are some lessons from 1990 that you can apply to today. What are the consequences of a piece of legislation on an individual Idahoan who may find themselves in a very difficult situation? Assuming, for example, that Idaho wants to limit abortion access just to cases where rape or incest or the health of the life of the mother is involved, what are the practical applications of how that works? The governor admitted that he didn't think those applications were really workable, and they would further victimize people who found themselves in those situations. We're going to find out, I'm afraid.
Well, since 1995, abortion bans have been enacted in more than half the states across the country and challenged in courts throughout. But all have been rebuffed because of the precedent set by Roe v. Wade. That is expected to change within, well, the next week or so. And with the landscape of abortion access across the country, that will change as well. So what will that look like? As Mr. Johnson said, we're going to find out.